everyone! Welcome back to Sewing with Sue, and I'm Sue from slowideas.com. This is a continuation of the project I'm doing, which is to sew a fairly simple summer tunic out of linen. I'm walking through the various steps of the project. So part one was doing my pattern adjustment for a full bust, and part two was looking at the rest of the pattern adjustments that I make on the back and laying out and cutting out the back. And tonight we're going to look at interfacing for the collar. But before we do that, I just want to bring you back up to speed because I made some changes to the project last night after broadcasting, and it wouldn't be fair if I didn't tell you what they were. So after the broadcast, I was looking at the back, and I had the front and the back pinned to the dress form, and I realized that despite the changes that I'd made, the back piece was still almost an inch shorter at the center back than it was at the sides because I had made an uneven adjustment. And I thought it was going to work out okay, but it didn't. Then I was a little stuck because I knew I really didn't have a lot of extra fabric and I didn't have enough to cut another on the fold. And I wanted to cut it out again because I did not want it to be shorter in the middle than on the sides because that would look wacky. So I made a design decision. It's a feature. Design decision, and I decided that I would have a center back seam. So that would allow me to put the pattern piece onto other parts of the fabric, avoiding that place where there was that hole in the fabric, and cut out two pieces instead of trying to find a place on my fabric where there would be room for one big piece, because this is a large pattern piece. I will add a little bit of tabletop view here so you can see what I'm talking about. My tabletop's a bit of a mess. I'm kind of all over the place today. So, oh, I'm in the wrong place for this camera too. Look at that. Let's just, can we adjust that? If I go this way, I'm still in the camera. Yes, kind of, sort of. We'll make some adjustments over here. And you should be good to go. Okay, that's better. Alrighty, so what I had done was I had this extra bit of length added on the side seam, but it wasn't added at the center because I didn't think I wanted it. Turns out I did. So I have cut two of these, reverse, not the same, and I have them on my dress form, which I also spent some time last night padding out. Let's just go back to this mostly me view so you can see the dress form. Here we go. So the back, oh, you can hardly see it on here, which is a good sign because it means it'll probably be hardly viewable on the finished garment. The back has a seam down the middle. Actually not a bad thing because it actually lets me shape that somewhat instead of having to have it be a straight line. So huzzah for design features, aka mistakes that I figured a way to fix. So the front I cut out pretty much exactly as I had prepared it, and I've got it pinned together on the dress form, which I have spent a little time padding out so it actually meets my new dimensions with the new bonus features on the sides, aka muffin top. So this front and back are now ready to begin sewing. I've transferred the marking. Oh, wait a minute. No, they're not. I've transferred most of the markings on the back piece, and there's not that many things that I have to know about to mark. There's a waist notch, and that just helps me line up the front and the back at the waist. There's usually a shoulder notch as well, but because I'm going to be fiddling around and changing where the shoulder seam sits, it's going to become a moot point. The thing I have not done yet is mark the dart on the front pattern piece. So depending upon how long it takes us to talk about interfacing tonight, I might show you how I mark that. It's pretty easy. It requires a few elements. I use some special equipment for it, but there are some things that you can use that you probably have around the house. You'll need chalk. You should have chalk. If you're sewing, you should have tailor's chalk. Okay, we're going to talk about interfacing. I have a very large collection of interfacing. And this is pared down because I moved it twice. So I'm not going to go through every single bolt here. What I am going to talk about is that there's 3 types of interfacing in terms of the fabrication. There is woven, non-woven, and knit. So woven, and they all come in either fusible, which has little dots of glue on one side, or non-fusible, also known as sew-in interfacing. And they come in different weights, and usually in white and black. So that's why I have so much interfacing, because I generally like to have stocks of it on hand, because then when I'm doing a project, I have the fabric in my stash. I usually have the lining in my stash. I do not want to have to run out and just to get the interfacing, because we all know what happens when I go to fabric stores. I buy more fabric. Now I just stock up whenever interfacing goes on half price at Fabricland, and hence I have a large collection. There's also some fabric, some interfacing that I buy over in Vancouver at a company called Atex. So we'll just go through some of the main types of it here. This is a woven interfacing by the Pellin Company, and it's called Shapeflex. It's SF101. This is sort of one of the more high-end interfacings. It's really good. So if you're going to be having interfacing in your stock, this is a good one to have. Interfacing all pretty much from these main companies. It'll come with these little paper wraps, I guess you can call them, that you buy, and they give them to you when you buy it. And it tells you a little bit about what the interfacing is for and how to use it. So this is 100% cotton, it's washable, it's dry cleanable, you can machine wash warm, machine dry medium, iron at the wool or steam setting, which is hot but not as hot as cotton. And so it gives you some general ideas about how to apply it to your project and what types of projects it could be used for. So this is used for smooth rolled collars, which is what we're going to be doing today, smartly rolled cuffs, and pockets. And also the Urban Jungle Bag. They give you a free pattern if you go to their website. So I'll just put this aside because this is what we'll be using today. But I'm just going to show you some of the other things that I find handy to have around. This is actually a weft interfacing. I can't actually tell if it's woven or knit, to be honest. It looks kind of, yeah, it's woven. And it's a little bit fuzzy on one side. It's fusible. It's quite light. It has those dots of glue, but not very much glue. And this is really good for just adding a little extra body to a fabric that's quite soft. So in doing a lightweight blazer, you might add it into the body piece of the front so that it holds the shape across the shoulder. So that's weft, and I have it in 2 colors, of course. Here is some heavy woven sew-in interfacing. So it's also 100% cotton. It, I think, has pretty much the same machine wash warm or cold, tumble dry, low, or dry clean. And it is good for, this shows that you're using it for a collar. So there's an option to use it for collars. And this is good. You want to use sew-in, not fusible, if your fabric has a loose weave, because if it's sort of there's holes in between the woven threads, what's going to happen is the glue from the fusible is going to soak through and harden your fabric, whereas sew-in interfacing does not. Honestly, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, I use knit interfacing because it's just way easier. And this is a knit. This is a straight up knit. And it's white. It's just like, it looks like a pair of nylons. It does stretch. It stretches out of shape very easily, so you don't go around stretching it before it's applied to your fabric. It does actually add a fair amount of heft, and it sort of hardens your fabric. If you're not sure what types of interfacing to use, some of the smaller fabric stores like Gala Fabrics, for example, will sell you some samples or swatches. Swatches are a fabric word for samples of different interfacings. And then you can go home and try ironing them onto your fabric to see if you like the result that you get before you buy a bunch of that interfacing. You should always test before you apply to your final project, because you don't want to end up with a project that you're like, this sucks because I used the wrong kind of interfacing. Finally, this is a non-woven, not knit interfacing, and it is made of a whole bunch of, let's see if you can see that. It's just sort of random fibers pressed together. And this is like super machine made, and it has, again, fusible dots on the back side. It comes in light, medium, and heavyweight. And it actually is pretty good when you're making waistbands. So I am actually wearing a top or a pair of pants that I made. Oops. And I have used it in the waistband of this garment, and it really thickens up the fabric and makes it quite strong. So I have that. This is sort of a medium weight, I think. And then I have the heavy. Actually, I think this is what I used for the waistband. Yeah, it's quite crisp. So, yeah, those are the major types. There's another product here called Hair Canvas, which is really, it's not fusible. It's even heavier than the heavy non-woven. This is woven, so it has a bit of a nicer drape. This is used for tailoring. It's added to the fronts of men's suits and women's heavier suits. Yeah, that's about it. I have a whole bunch of crazy cool products here. Half the time I don't even know what I've got until I figure, hey, maybe I'll look to see if I have that. It is the, I'm trying to remember which one I buy from Atex. I believe it's this weft fusible, because they do sell it at Fabricland, but they, in their process of getting it to the store, they will cut it in half and sell it to you for twice the price. Thanks a lot, Fabricland. So they, yeah, getting it from Atex, I will go and I'll just buy 10 meters of it and have it on hand. It's usually about $8 a meter, $8 to $10 a meter. That is the sale price, but compare that to buying it at Fabricland, where it's usually $12 a meter for half the width. So no bueno. Alrighty, I'll put those aside. Hope they don't fall down in the middle of the broadcast. Let's look at what we're gonna do to get our collar piece. Now I have a bunch of extra fabric. Let's just put tabletop view on here. There we go. Okay, this is my front pattern, or my back pattern piece. I'm done with that. I'll put that aside. I have a whole bunch of extra fabric from cutting out my pieces. Good thing I wasn't trying to do sleeves. There was that hole in it, but I thought, well, if I can't fix the hole, I might have to use a piece of fabric with the hole. So I covered it over with a piece of weft interfacing and pressed it in place. And you can see the mark on the back side, but this will hold that. So if I had to use a piece of fabric with a hole in it, that's something I could do. Fusible interfacing for the win. So I've got a lot of this extra, and then I have that extra back piece that I decided not to use because the cutting out went kind of funky. Oh, it looks like my tabletop cam is frozen. That's not good. Let's bring it back to just me and see if we can get that fixed. I think it's just running a little slow today. Okay, that seems to be working now. Yes, excellent, good. Okay, the reason I have this back piece out is I think I might be able to use it to cut out my collar. No. Okay. Not even down here where it's wider. Oh, yes, I can use a bit of this. And being of fairly cheap inclinations, this would otherwise be wasted fabric. So I don't want to waste it. I want to use it. But I'm not going to cut it out just yet because there's a trick that I want to show you. Instead of having to cut my fabric pieces out and also my interfacing out separately and then hope that they all line up and get matchy, I am going to apply the interfacing to some of the fabric and press it in place, and then I will cut it out as one. This works if you're not doing like fancy couture tailoring. If you were doing fancy couture tailoring, you would be using a sew-in interfacing, and you would cut out a smaller piece so that it doesn't stick out through the seams you're going to sew. Which makes the seams kind of bulky and hard to turn, and they don't behave very well. So you would use the sew-in interfacing and cut it away from the seam allowances. I am just using fusible because it's easier and it's what I do for most of my projects. So I need enough interfacing here that I can cut this on the fold. But this pattern piece is too wide for this piece of interfacing. Now you can buy this interfacing wider from other sources. They've cut it down and sold it for more. So since I know I'm gonna have to piece this anyways, what I'll do is I will fold this over so I've got two pieces the same size, and I'm going to just sort of cut a rough shape out of this, going way around the edges. So enough for two of these. Okay, and I'll sort of, there we go. Okay, so I've got two pieces of interfacing. I need to cut one on a fold of interfacing, but since I can't, I'll have to overlap them or butt them up against each other. And I'm going to go on the wrong side of this fabric, so not the pretty pattern side, but the inside. And I'm going to lay these pieces down onto the fabric, just sort of get them in place so that the glue is down. You can tell which side the glue is on because it's got texture. And I'm going to get those lined up so that the weave of the interfacing matches the weave of the garment fabric. And I have heated up my iron to the wool setting, which is what the instructions on the interfacing packaging said. And I'm going to give it a little steam. My steam reservoir is a little bit empty. I might not get too much steam out of this. That's okay. So I'm just going to press it. I'm not moving back and forth because that would possibly distort the fibers. And I don't want that. I want them to stay really in kind of that grid woven form. And yeah, this really does work better with steam. Actually, I think I might go and grab some water and give it some steam. Some irons come with a fancy measuring cup to put your steam in. Mine doesn't. You just have to turn off the iron, and then you get to open up this little portal and pour the water in. Carefully. I happen to know that my iron reservoir has a capacity of 300 milliliters. I know that because I read it on the box when I bought it. So there we go. That's closed. Now I can turn it on again, and it just takes a couple more minutes to heat up. So where I pressed before, it has attached itself to my table because I was pressing over here where there's glue, but it overlaps over the garment fabric I'm using. Oopsie. That's why I have my tabletop covered in this reflective heat-treated cotton canvas, which I just replace the tabletop every so often. There's also a layer of quilt batting in there to keep the tabletop nice. Although this is just the desk that I use for sewing, I'm not going to worry too much about sacrificing my tabletop. If you had an ironing board, you would just do this on your ironing board. So trying not to press and move, I am actually like picking it up as I move it around, and then just letting the weight of the iron do its work. My cord is whipped around other things here, so I'm gonna have to move this in that direction to keep pressing it. It usually takes about 5 to 10 seconds of steamy heat contact. There's a technical term for you. To get the glue to melt and then to get it to fuse. If it's taking longer than that, you're doing something wrong. Possibly you don't have your iron turned on. I do find that the glue on knit interfacing does take a little bit longer. And also the glue sometimes leaks through or passes through that knit. So I will often just throw a piece of cotton over top of it so that the glue gets on the cotton and not on my iron. So there we go. I now have a somewhat stiffened piece of my garment fabric that is wide enough for me to fold over. I can actually cut this off because I'm not using the rest of it. I just want to use a smaller piece. There we go. Okay, lining this up so it's on the fold. And I'm going to pin this in place. This is called block fusing. What I'm doing, I have fused blocks of my interfacing to my fabric, and then I will pin the pattern to the fabric, and I'll be good to go. So once again, I'm putting pins in the corner and then having them about every 5 inches apart to keep curves in place so that as I'm cutting it, it stays on and I can cut a nice straight even line. Cutting out collars, you really do want to be very accurate to the lines because the more accuracy you have on those lines, the more straight and even your finished collar will look. So here we go. Now this is tricky because it's got this one thick line for all of the different sizes. This is just the way pattern things print. I'm aiming for the middle size on this multi-size pattern, so I'm just going to kind of try to cut right up the middle of this really thick line. So that looks pretty good. Fairly true to form, and I'll do this side as well. There is probably best practice for whether you should cut out cross grain or with the grain parts of your pattern pieces first. I think it matters more that your pattern piece and the fabric is supported, the weight of the fabric is supported. So if you have a smallish table and you're cutting out a pattern piece and the rest of the fabric is falling off the table, with fairly stable knits, or sorry, stable wovens, it might not be a huge problem, but the more unstable the fabric is, like the more the weave could shift or the more it could stretch, the more it matters that you have all of the fabric supported. So I will just pile up the extra fabric on the edge of my table. If I can't fit an entire pattern piece on my table, I go to the floor and I lay it out on the floor, because it can really make your pattern pieces go wonky. Like it can be 2 or 3 inches out of alignment on a big pattern piece. So if you're doing, you know, a fancy dress or a big skirt, for example, you need to have all your fabric supported. Okay, I'm almost done with this piece. There we go. Okay, so now it's time to transfer my markings here. And I will just grab, there's a couple things I use for that. I've been using this tailor-made wash out fabric marker. It washes out lately. And I also have been known to use my tailor's chalk or that friction reusable marker or friction erasable marker. So whatever you choose to do, there's a little round dot here that is in different places for different sizes. And I want to transfer that to my pattern. I want to transfer it somewhere I'm going to be able to see it later. So I'm putting it on the interfacing side. You don't want to put your markings on your garment side, just in case the thing that you're using to mark with turns out to be not as temporary as you thought it was. And I have this triangle mark as well, so I will just mark that in with my pen as a notch. I think that's, yep, that's about accurate. Accuracy really matters when you're doing a collar. This dot is where your side seams will be on the shirt. So that helps you align it. And I'm also going to mark the center back, because that will have to line up with my center back seam now that I have one in this shirt. There we go. Okay, there's one other pattern marking I'm going to do tonight, and then I'll call it a night and start drinking wine. I need to mark where the dart is on this front so that I can sew that. I haven't marked any of these pattern pieces. I have it pinned out just so I could see how it looked on the dress form. Okay, so there's a variety of places where there are markings, and one of them is here, view A and B. I'm using view B, so I need to mark that. That is, I don't know why. I'll find out later why that's marked. So I'll use my reusable, my washout. This washes out, it doesn't fade. There are all kinds of different fabric markers. Some of them wash out, some of them will fade away. And so if you've got a project that you're working on over a couple of days and you come back to it and your marks have faded, that's crappy. Okay, so there's these lines here that I need to mark. Now, the low-tech way is to do something called a tailor's tack. And this is something that your home ec teacher will have taught you. And that's why I don't like doing it, because it's the slow way. But if you don't have any of the special equipment that I have, you're going to need to do this. So I will show you, because this is all about getting you sewing, not necessarily having all of the fancy equipment. Okay, so I've just cut a length of thread. It's pink, because pink will show up against my fabric. If I were to use black, then it would be really hard to see. Now, it's been a really long time since I've actually done tailor's tacks, so we're gonna see if I do this right. And somewhere, somehow, there's gonna be a home ec teacher watch this and tell me that I did it wrong, but Okay, so I've doubled over the thread and then threaded my needle. And what I'm gonna do is start at this middle point, and I'm gonna go through both layers of the through the pattern and both layers of the fabric, and I will pull it out until there's about an inch or so left on this side, and then on the other side I will go back through and back up and pull it out, but I'm not pulling it all the way through. I'm not making a stitch. I want to leave a loop on this side. I just realized you really can't see. I wonder if we can zoom in here. Oh, wow. Okay, now zooming and trying to shift the camera. That's better. Ooh. Sort of. Yes. Oh, I love it. Okay, so I have a loop on this side, and I have my needle came out, went somewhere. Oh, it unthreaded itself. Look at that. I'll just rethread it. Man, oh man, threading needles is getting harder as I get older. This is also a needle with an incredibly small eye to it. Don't know why I even have such a thing in my possession, but I do. So I've got 1.5 inches plus my long thread tail here, and I've got about 1.5 inches of a loop here. So I'll cut my thread off, and then very carefully I'm going to reach in between my fabric layers. And now you understand why I don't do this all the time, right? I'm putting my finger down on where that tailor tack is coming through, and I'm pulling it back so that I can see about maybe 3/4 of an inch of thread going between my two layers here, and I'm going to snip in between the threads, or in the middle, leaving a small amount of thread poking through each side of the fabric, marking that spot on the fabric. And basically what I would do if I was going to do this entire dart marking in that method is I would leave tailor's tacks along in dots along my pattern line to kind of let me connect the dots. Oh boy, that doesn't look like a very fun way to do it. So instead I have something called chalked tracing paper. You can buy a package of this at wherever you're going to buy your fabric and your pattern, and I have a tracing wheel. And honestly, these are like some pretty basic, important sewing tools to have. This paper has colored chalk on one side, although this is getting pretty old, so it doesn't really rub off anymore, but when you get a new package, it rubs off quite a bit. And it's just paper on the other side. So I have folded it over. You can see I've used this quite a lot. There's lots there. and I'm going to say to heck with those tailor tacks. I'm going to slide this in between my layers of fabric and pat that down and try to make sure everything under there is really lined up the way that it should be. And then I'm going to use my tracing wheel, which has all kinds of delightful pokey bits on it. And where am I at here? You can't see what I'm doing. If I move over that way, you can see what I'm doing. There we go. That's better, isn't it? Okay. So I'm going to just put my wheel on and I'm going to roll across that line. And I'm going to roll across the other line. I'm pressing pretty hard here because what I want is for it to show up on both sides. It shows up really well on the top. Actually, you can't even really see that on the camera. Well, take my word for it. It shows up really well. I can see it perfectly. And there's a fairly faint dotted line on the underside. So I will just take my marker or my tailor's chalk and I'll just go over that. Draw that in, trying to go over the line that was there. That's not it. There we go. So now you can see the line that I've drawn. Sort of. I didn't do a very straight line. Okay. That's how I mark darts so that I can find them and sew them later. And there are a few more. There's the waist point on that. And this has a spot over here, which you can't see anymore because I'm zoomed in. But I'm just finding all of the circles on the pattern that show me marking points. The instruction sheet for commercial patterns has a bit of a written sort of rundown of marking your pattern and transferring your markings. So that can be a nice refresher for you. Okay, so let's just go back to mostly me here because I think I am pretty much good with the tabletop. So what I'm going to do next, tomorrow night at 7:30, join me, mark it in your calendars, is I will be ready to sew that dart. I'm going to tidy up my seam allowances. And I will be sewing my shoulders and my side seams. And then I will pretty much end up with a shirt. And then after that, we'll have to put the collar on. And that'll take some doing. So that'll probably be one whole broadcast. And then we'll need to bind the armholes with something because we decided not to do facing. And I'll need to finish the neckline. And then the hem. Then it's done. Yay. So, once again, I hope you'll join me in my odyssey as I put together this pattern that I've never used before with fabric I've not used before. And this is an invitation to you to get that sewing machine out of your closet and start using it because, as you can see, sewing is made up of learning by trial and error. And that's how you get from complete rookie to I can make anything. Thanks very much. Don't forget to subscribe. I would love it, actually, if my friends would subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's down there, I think. Maybe it's down there in the corner. Subscribe and like the video because nobody's watching these. Why should I make them? Okay, I make them because they're fun, but if you subscribe, then you get notifications of my next broadcast or next videos, And every now and then I might sneak in an extra little video if I'm inspired to show you a particular step on another garment that I'm working on, like putting in a zipper or doing a hood or a pocket or something fun like that. So yeah, thanks everybody. Have a lovely evening and stay safe.